Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear, here with you, and we have a guest here, a good friend of ours, Jon Iversen. You've usually behind the camera.
Usually.
And now he gets to be in front of it, because we're talking about a neat subject, really about flight evolution. And I think that's the title of our show tonight, isn't it, Doug?
Yeah, and the reason we have Jon on the show is because he's a pilot, and he's one of the organizations that he works with. He's volunteered with a number of organizations that we are involved with, but he's involved with a group called Wings of Mercy. And
plus, he's also got a wing in it.
Yeah, I guess that's what we're going to do tonight a little bit. But
no mercy.
But Jon, tell us about Wings of Mercy first of all, and what they do, and what their purpose is.
Wings of Mercy takes people that cannot afford to fly from Michigan, in our case anyway. Many states have programs like this, but in Michigan, we will fly people to Rochester Clinic, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Cincinnati, wherever people need to go within about 500 or 600 miles. And it's a real, it's not a, I can't call it a lifesaver because we don't do like medical emergency flights. But for people that the transportation is truly a hardship, and is a difference between going to those places and not getting or not getting good medical care, we make a big difference.
Yeah, I remember with my situation, I had to depend on an organization like that. It's a different organization. But
Volunteer Mercy Pilots.
Are they joined together? Or are they?
They're in the process of.
Okay,
yes.
So anyway, but it's a similar organization. Yep. When your sister, my wife, had that horrible thing happen at the hospital, got her down to a medical clinic down in Florida, and it was an amazing. It was to me, it was a lifesaver, and she's still around today. Yes, very compromised, but I tell you that she's alive and doing pretty well, all things considered, because of an organization like that.
And went down in a coma, basically, and came back not in a coma anymore.
No, very alert and attentive, they call her now, but yeah, but it was a very, very traumatic thing. So I have a lot of good things to say about these kinds of organizations. They really do, and they do it when they say volunteer. They're not really getting paid for this. These are people generally that have their own planes or access to them.
The pilots, the pilots donate their aircraft, and then
amazing.
Wings of Mercy, Volunteer Mercy pilots, and for those of you who live in other states, you can contact what's called the Air Care Alliance. Now, I thought it was the Hair Care Alliance the first time, so I didn't volunteer for it. But anyway, but the Air Care Alliance in your state can tell you where to get those services in your state. There are organizations all over the United States and even other countries that provide this for their in-state residents.
Now, we're talking about this in relationship to our TV show, Revolution Against Evolution. And flight has always been an interesting thing from my standpoint. How can you have a creature like a reptile over a period of small increments of change evolve feathers and suddenly start to jump from tree to tree to try to fly, and because of that, that creates some sort of evolutionary pressure that will create all these changes, and then eventually go from non-flying reptile to a flying bird. And
Doug, it's interesting you bring that up, and with combination of Jon with an airplane, which we obviously know an airplane and flight did not evolve. And I remember going to a lecture one time, Richard Dawkins, and he spent a whole much time showing why the airplane would not evolve, but the flight of things like birds, flying fish, bats, reptiles, insects, those were spontaneously, or if you will, by properties inherent in nature. They had the appearance of design, but aren't really designed. I would say, wow, compared to the complexity of a bat wing or an insect, dragonfly wing, an airplane wing is nothing. Okay, it's an amazing thing. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not disparaging an airplane wing, but compared to the wings in nature.
The original, if you go back and look at ornithopters and some of the stuff they tried in the 1800s to mimic birds in flight,
so it's a great time.
We still cannot mimic or imitate and make a wing fly like a bird wing flies. We cannot do that. And or if we do, or if they're getting to the point where they can, it's so incredibly complex and expensive. You'd have to have a very sophisticated computer program to make that function. And so we can't. It's very difficult to generate that by human beings trying to create something like that.
For years, I remember growing up. Recently, I guess in the last 20 years, maybe 15, they figured out that there's ways to why the bumblebee can fly. But I mean, for years, I remember reading, and maybe it was an old wives' tale, but I remember in science class, the bumblebee is aerodynamically impossible to fly, yet it does it. And I think they figured out a way.
There's vortexes that it creates in the air. Of course, insects have no weight problem to overcome, or very little weight, so it's a little bit easier for them to get off the ground. But you have to you have a little compact bug, a gnat, or something of that size, with all the complexity available for you to fly. How could that come about by chance?
I know. We've done a lot with Jerry Bergman and other people. You met, I think you met Jerry before, John. But he talks about all the incredible biological machines in nature, and we've been able to sort of imitate some of them very crudely, but not. But our big thing is now getting like nanotechnology, we're just beginning to figure out how to make things in the microcosm. But Doug, the thing that's more, or just as importantly to me, is not only is flight in nature an amazing thing, but it developed at least 4 or 5 different ways and absolutely different programming that set them up. Like an insect wing is not the same as a bird wing.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And it's not the same as a mammal's, a bat.
Or a bat wing.
Or a bat wing. Or the reptiles that have gone extinct, the pterosaurs. That's a different, we don't know what really the genetic makeup of those are, because as far as I know, we don't have any living ones to examine. But the other ones we might, but that's one of those great things. We keep hoping we're going to turn up with a living pterosaur one of these days. But there's so many things, Doug. Getting it once, we've got, like you said, we've got helicopters, regular airplanes. We've got different kinds of flying things that we've used.
If you want to get a migraine, watch a video on the aerodynamics of how a helicopter really does function. It took them a long time to figure that one out, and helicopters they're an amazing piece of equipment, but they're simple compared to an insect wing or a bird wing, and how they fly. Very much simpler. And so, anyways, it's amazing to me that a creature, an insect, or an animal that can fly does not really have a ton of intellect either. And yet we knock ourselves silly trying to emulate flight as human beings.
I know,
it's not simple and easy.
It's amazing. They sit there, you get there, how complex these different mechanisms are for the different types of animal things to fly. And we used to have a joke. We spent all this time trying to figure out how to imitate nature, which proves that it happened with no intellect behind it, no design behind it. I go, well, that sort of begs the question. It's like there's incredible design, but oftentimes I think it's like you can't see the forest for the trees. Richard Dawkins makes this big presentation about why the airplane wing was designed, but why the insect wing or the bird wing was not. And I go, you have got to, and people come out of that shaking their head going, did he really say that with a straight face? Mm-hmm. And he did. That's how convoluted you get in your own, because we look at it, like you say, I would have took to figure out how to do a helicopter. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't do anything with helicopters. Do they do anything
I do not, and here's the problem with aviation. I don't care how intelligent you are, and I don't care how creative you are. If you don't have a lot of money in your wallet, you're not getting off the ground. And helicopters cost about 6 to 10 times as much per hour to operate as a small aircraft.
So most people with helicopter things got to probably start in the military or something.
Pretty much. I mean, you can buy these little Robinson R-22s, and there's some Barney copters out there that you can try to.
So they don't use any of those with your volunteer?
No, absolutely
I didn't know if they ever had anything. Because that's what, like, is it on Medevac?
Well, Medevac, they would use helicopters, but we do not fly sick patients. We do not fly people that require medical treatment while they're being flown. They have to be able to get in an airplane on their own. They have to be able to get out of the airplane. And
well, they broke the rule with Carol.
They broke the rule with you, but they.
And thank God they did.
You can't have a medical emergency while you're in flight. You have to be stable medically. You have to be physically fit to make the trip in an airplane.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's one thing that's quite interesting is that besides these 4 different types of creatures that have actual flight.
So let's list them before we go any. Birds,
Bats,
flying mammals, insects, and flying reptiles.
right.
Which the last category is the one really, as far as we know, we haven't discovered a
You just
provable
see it as a
living
fossil
one yet.
record.
What's
Now,
that?
it's interesting
Fossil
that,
record, yeah.
I guess they've just found a fossil bird someplace in South Carolina that had a wingspan of 24 feet.
Wow.
A regular
A
bird?
regular bird.
That's almost as large as a standard 4-passenger airplane.
Wow. You wonder if that's where
Wow.
some of the story, the mythological bird, the rock,
Right, yeah.
you know, the giant bird. You wonder if maybe there was more.
This is sort of like an
truth to it.
albatross type of bird.
Is that what it was? Wow. 24 feet?
But
Oh, man.
there was an interesting comment I saw on the Wikipedia when I looked this up. I was just doing some browsing on this, and it talked about the flying fish. And here's
Oh, yeah, we didn't talk about that.
And there was a quote that I saw on Wikipedia that I thought was just silly. And here's what it said about it. It is thought that this ability, we're talking about flight, was chosen by natural selection because it was an efficient means of escape from underwater predators. Now, right here, you're using a whole bunch of fallacy in your thinking. If you're, first of all, you anthropomorphize saying it was chosen, okay? It's attributing some sort of intelligence to this
You can't get away from it, really.
This unknown thing called natural selection.
Yeah.
They might as well capitalize natural selection as some sort of god here.
Well, the other thing, if you know anything about fishing, like during the mayfly hatches and stuff, when you go trout fishing, the best time to go fishing is when it's raining out because the surface of the water is getting pelted with rain, and the fish a lot of times think that that's the mayflies and stuff. And so if you go fishing then and you're casting a lure into the water and it's going kerplunk, the fish are attracted to that. Why would anything that's in the water want to jump out of the water and then crash back into the water? That's telling everything around it that, hey, I'm dinner, you know, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not talking whether it's from a creationist or an evolutionist standpoint. I'm just talking about from the fish's standpoint. Why would you want to create a bunch of noise or
It's
a footprint for
also
yourself?
sort of assuming the idea that the fish has some sort of intelligence that
Right.
Yeah.
creates itself, you know. And it doesn't, and nature doesn't do that. There's no way that you could.
Yeah, just because you decide you want to do something doesn't mean you could do it. I mean, Doug, the properties for actually flight working, there's several things you have to have functioning before that happens. What are what do we need to have to actually fly? To tell you how, I mean, people kind of we understand as companies. You talked about the airplanes and helicopters. I mean, in animal kingdom, it's a very complicated process, and there are several things that you need to have work for you, don't you?
Yeah, it's like if I just think real hard, maybe my
I'm going to jump into the tree now, therefore I
maybe
can
my
fly.
hair is going to grow.
Oh, when I was a kid, Doug, I wanted to do. I said, if I could just will myself. Anybody ever do that? When you're almost all boys want to fly, and maybe some gals too. But I mean, I know guys. If I could just will myself, I could maybe fly an inch or two off the
Calvin
ground.
and Hobbes cartoon.
Oh, I could just. I was Calvin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was. I mean, sorry. You know, I mean, I should have drawn that.
We're kind of
cartoon.
getting a
Yeah.
Jonathan Livingston Seagull territory here.
But no, I just thought if I could do it, but it never worked.
Right.
You know, so then I thought, okay, well, maybe I could try jumping out of a window with a blanket.
Umbrella or a-
you know, and then I could fly. Woohoo! Thud. That didn't work either. First,
The
I tried.
law of gravity is incontrovertible. It will not fail.
Yeah, well.
So if you were to be an engineer, that you're going to create something to fly, let alone have it evolve by itself, there's certain things that are required in order to be able to get this thing
Get this thing off the ground.
You'd have to have some way of creating aerodynamic lift. You also have some sort of propulsive thrust to be
Get
able
you going
to
this
get
way.
you going that
Okay.
way. There's another way you can do it is maybe become lighter than air. You know, fill yourself up with helium.
Balloons.
Yeah, we figured out with balloons long before we got airplanes. They were trying to get heavier than air flight for years, but they never had a propulsive system for it. They had balloons. 1700s anyway. They were beginning to do some of that stuff.
And then
So-
another way to fly is maybe by a ballistic type of movement. You just shoot an arrow in the
But that's sort of the propulsive
flying through
thrust.
the air has some type of aerodynamic properties. Some of them will support lift and will stay in the air a little bit longer than other things. I mean, you can take a piece of paper and fold it up, and it's definitely heavier than air, and you can pitch it, and it might fly for 50 or 75 feet just from its inertia.
But that propulsion,
But it won't stay in the air
propulsion,
forever.
you know, propulsive thrust, you need it. You need it with ballistics too, Doug. You need that propulsive thrust. You need something like that.
Then you have things like gliding and soaring, and I was when I took my daughter out to Arizona, she stopped at a friend of hers that lived in Dallas area, and they had flying squirrels as pets, and they were
Really?
all kinds of fun. They climb up and get in your pocket, and sort of like cuddle there. But then they'll crawl up in your shoulders. Then they'll see somebody over there, and they'll go boom, jump over to the other.
Did you see this?
Oh yes.
When did you
it
see
was
this?
Really fun.
Well, we were out there last time they didn't do that. I
No,
didn't
this
see-
was when I first took her out.
Well, first, yeah, several years ago.
So these are tameable, semi-tameable.
Yeah, they're tameable. They actually breed them in aviaries,
okay.
where they have cages and they raise them up.
That would be the coolest thing. Have a squirrel get in your pocket and then get up and take
Yeah,
off.
it's sort of like
That'd be awesome to see.
pet hamsters, only they're flying, and it was just so much fun. They'd jump, and one of them jumped and missed and landed in the wastebasket.
Well, you know, there's a percentage of birds that don't make it past the nest stage because they have to leave the nest and they have to fly. Just like pilots, at some point in time, have to solo and then, you know, do certain other things if they want to really be the pilot and command guy. Then there's things you have to do to get there, and you have to fly on your own at some point. And there is a chance of a pretty high percentage mortality for birds when they first get out of the nest, because they don't know if they can fly or not, and they might be 20 or 30 feet in the air, and the first time they go out, they've had no training, you know, they don't know if they're going to make it.
Yeah,
or
what was
not.
that? That was a
You know.
Pixar type movie or something that came out last year. Rango? No, it wasn't that. What was that? They were in South America, Rio or something. And the bird didn't want to get out and fly. But I think about that. I go, you know, they got to get out. But I have a lot of windows in my house, and I've had a few birds. You know, they get the soaring interrupted because that glass really messes them up. But you know, an airplane does say that if you don't don't know how to read your controls right,
Instruments,
you fly into an instrument right, you can fly into a side of a mountain if you're not careful.
Well,
you know? Especially
that's
if fog is.
most
Yeah.
of the time when that occurs is because somebody didn't do proper pre-flight planning and the flight got away from them.
Right, but yeah,
And that happens.
That's the way it is
That
today.
does
But in
happen.
the early days, people didn't have all that stuff. They had to,
Right.
they had to figure it out.
Well,
you know?
that or they just had to stay on the ground when the weather was bad.
Yeah,
So
well,
what would
that too.
you go through in terms of a pre-flight plan?
When you pre-flight, you mean for the trip you're going to take?
Yeah.
You have what's called an airport facility directory. You want to make sure that the airport that you're flying to is open. You don't want to try to go to Meigs Field anymore. That's not going to work.
Mixed field.
Meigs Field in Chicago.
Meigs Field.
You're not going to go to land at Meigs anymore. But anyway, you want to make sure the airport is going to be open. You want to know the lengths of the runways. You want to know the orientation of the runways, the expected winds at the runways. If they have fuel there, and if they have a courtesy car, in case you have to drive someplace to get dinner, or if they have a restaurant down the field. You want to know if they have a control tower or not, because if they have one, you better be talking to them when you come to land there. And if they don't have one, you just want to know that so that you know you're talking to the pilots in the neighborhood in general when you show up in the area. So you want to know information about the airports that you intend to land at first. You really have to check the weather. The number one killer of pilots is weather, period. Ask John Kennedy if you know. But in all seriousness, weather is the biggest factor. You better know your frontal systems and your ceilings and wind directions, and you got to know a lot about weather. You almost have to be a meteorologist to be a pilot and be a safe pilot.
So do you think that birds are meteorologists?
I don't. Well, I have no way of knowing that. I mean, I had a dog that knew when thunderstorms were coming 6 to 12 hours before they came, and he would go down into the basement and he would stay there till 2 hours after they were gone, minimum.
I sometimes don't think that birds that I
They
think
may have that sense.
that
I don't
God
know.
may have put
Yeah.
these innate things into them so they know.
You don't see birds flying around a lot when it's raining out. They know enough to get out of the rain, unlike human beings. But some pilots don't know better than. I'm not saying pilots shouldn't fly in the rain, but you certainly don't want to be flying in thunderstorms or
Right.
fog or ice or anything. Those are no-nos.
Yeah.
Are there any misconceptions about flight that you?
I think most people could be a pilot if they really wanted to. If they're not like full blown type 1 diabetic or there's certain medical conditions that you probably aren't, the FAA might not allow you to fly with. But generally, most people could fly if they wanted to. I think the thing that holds people back more than anything else is just money. You're talking a $10,000 or $15,000 investment today to get just to get a pilot certificate. That doesn't buy you an airplane. That doesn't give you an instrument rating, so you can go places in bad weather, or not bad weather, but with low ceilings and bad visibility.
It's
expensive.
that, don't we?
Oh, yes, we do.
You want to tell that story? That's kind of a funny story.
Now the camera's rolling. No. Rich and I got stuck in New York, and we got stuck in Rochester, New York, one time for a few days. And the weather was bare minimum VFR weather to get back to Lansing.
It just stayed there for like
And
days.
it hung on and hung on and hung on. The ceilings finally came up to where it was barely legal to fly through New York and we had to fly through Canada to get back here because we had to stay north of this weather system. And it was probably the toughest flight I've ever done from a weather standpoint. I would not do it again. It wasn't illegal to do the flight. I'm not going to say that. It wasn't, but it wasn't. It was on the edge of stupidity.
But yeah, we went right up through a hole.
Yeah.
And got kind of just because the ceiling was 100.
No, they were 1,500 to 2,000 feet off the deck, but not very high, which is minimum for VFR flight. And then we found this opening in the clouds, and we got up through that near Buffalo, New York, and then we flew most of the way through Canada above the clouds, which is legal to do. And then we found a big hole and went down through that.
Really? It was
and back under the clouds. And
then we got to Michigan, and all the
Michigan, the ceilings were all open.
Everything opened up.
Yeah, we didn't even have to go down through the clouds in there. It's like, oh, that would have been nice to know.
Yeah, but
it was an interesting trip, but I was on pins and needles the whole time. He was asleep in the airplane, so talk about trust. I earned it that day.
There's nothing I could do anyway,
Yeah, you could panic and make my life even harder.
So there's actually 4 different forces on the aircraft that affects the flight. You have thrust, you have lift, you have drag, and then you have weight.
Gravity.
And those things are you have to have more thrust and more lift than you have drag and weight or gravity
to sustain flight. Yeah.
To sustain flight. Now, you also have to control those 4 different forces in various ways to take off and to land. Landing is almost as difficult of a thing.
Landing is far more difficult than taking off in an airplane. Most students can do an unassisted takeoff in an airplane within 2 or 3 hours of instruction, and you can spend the next 15 or 20 hours getting that landing down. Because most pilots, if somebody's flying a 757 or 787, they're starting their approach 200 or 300 miles ahead of time. In other words, they're in Chicago when they're coming to Lansing, Michigan, and they're already setting up for their approach. Most airplanes I fly, you'd be flying below 10,000 feet, and you want to plan a descent of around 500 feet per minute. And so if you're at 10,000 feet and the airport's at 700 feet, it's going to take you about 15 or 20 minutes to descend at 500 feet a minute so that you're in the vicinity of the airport that you want to land at.
So that always amazed me. There's like for Detroit to Lansing flights, which is like you go up and down. It's
exactly.
Like,
that's literally how it is.
I don't even know how they do that because it's like
they're planning their arrival and their landing on their takeoff. As soon as they're in the air, they're already.
It's like 20 minutes from Detroit, on a plane. So
yeah.
Well, Doug, so thrust, we know what that is. It's force behind, right?
Right.
And lift is what? Is that like the wings? You got the wings?
The shape of the wings, the camber and the angle of attack of the wings.
Allows less air pressure on the top of it, so allows you to
that's another misconception that people have. People think that the wing, somehow wind is hitting the back of the wing or the bottom of the wing.
No, but it's actually it's because of the shape.
What happens because of the camber of the wing on the top of the wing, the air has to travel faster over the top of the wing than over the bottom of the wing. If you study Bernoulli's principle, you have a low pressure system on top of the wing.
So it allows you to go up.
That pull from the top of the wing is what lifts you in the air. Now, the other misconception people have is, well, that airplane stalled and and I didn't hear the engine stalled or whatever. Well, engines don't stall in airplanes. The wing stalls. When that lift factor breaks off the top of the wing, then you're in a stall mode. That's when you fall out of the sky and enter a spin.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But it has nothing to do with the engine. You can stall.
What
it
is
different.
drag? What does that mean?
Drag is all the air, when the air pulls across the wings and across the fuselage and everything, that's the aerodynamic
Is that something
drag.
you have to overcome then?
You have to overcome
Okay.
that with horsepower or with thrust and eject.
But of course, weight is obvious. That's like the heavy in an airplane. Okay, all right.
And an aircraft will have various methods of powering it. You know, you have the propeller craft and the jet craft, and then in living systems you have the muscle power of the wings, and you remember Joe Mastrapalo?
Yeah.
He's the guy who was on the team for the human-powered flight.
Ah, right,
And
right.
he actually flew this aircraft a number of times in preparation for the.
Do you remember how long was your longest flight was? Do you
It went
remember?
across the English Channel.
Yeah,
That's substantial for
pretty
a
good.
human-powered
Yeah,
flight.
that's
yeah.
amazing that he was able
I mean,
to
the
do
Wright
that.
brothers at Kitty Hawk only went like, what, 500 feet or something?
It was
They
not.
didn't-
I thought it was about 130 feet.
Yeah,
It was
it
really
wasn't
short.
far.
Yeah.
But in this case, I guess this Gossamer Condor is what it was called, and it was a pretty fragile aircraft. It was all balsa wood, and
Right.
it was like a little glider that we used to get in the dime stores, you know. But there was just a whole bunch of different measurement of factors in order to get that human-powered craft to fly.
To fly, yeah.
And
And it is interesting that the one difference is mainly, I mean, you had the propeller and the helicopter going around, but most of our stuff is fixed wing, which just, where in living systems, the wings themselves are what move,
Right,
causes
yeah.
the, I think that's kind of fascinating to me, how different it is.
It's actually swimming in the air in some
It's
sort of
quite amazing, yeah.
sense. It's really an amazing thing, and to really believe, I can't really imagine the type of faith it takes to believe that came about by chance.
Yeah.
It's
Especially like you
plus-
said, with there are 4 different types of animals, insects, and various things that have
have to have
flight.
occurred 4
Yeah.
different times. You know.
Yeah, and you would think that those things would have all been related to each other in the
Yeah, they're all different.
in the chain of evolution, but they're not.
Well, we don't believe that ever happened, and we hope you enjoyed our show on Revolution Against Evolution. We'll see you next time.